Greetings, everyone. I appreciate you taking time to join us here. Today, we're joined by Wendie Michie, who's the CEO of Zoomforth. Wendie, thanks for joining.
Thank you for having me.
So I'd like to start off because Zoomforth looks like a really cool company. So I'd love to learn more about what the company does and what you enjoy about running it.
Yeah, sure. Well, essentially, Zoomforth is a design platform, and we have mostly enterprise customers, so large global organizations, and they're using us to create personalized, branded microsites for everything from learning and recruiting through to marketing and sales proposals. So yeah, it's pretty much what we do. It's like Squarespace, but it's for the enterprise, for those that know that company. And why do I like leading it? I guess primarily it's the people I work with. The Zoomforth team are a bunch of really creative, they're very kind, supportive people. So that's wonderful. And I think as well, our customer community is really engaged in product development. So that makes for some really interesting conversations as well about where we're going to take the product. So they're probably the big two reasons that I like to work there.
Very cool. Yeah, it seems like you're doing some really interesting stuff. So appreciate the additional context there. And I saw, I guess for the next question, I saw that you had recently given an interview back in August. I think it was with Advertising Review, maybe. At least that was when it was published. Yeah. So one of the questions on there that I thought would be worth diving into more, you talked about, especially coming through COVID-19 and all the changes, managing through that time of crisis, how you and the company kind of sat down and came up with some different financial forecast scenarios and then used that to make some very difficult decisions. So, would love to hear more about that, kind of what types of forecasts you put together and kind of how you went about that.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, we did it both on a cash and an accrual basis. So we had a couple of different views of how things would look. At that time, it was March 2020. Obviously, back then we had no idea how the pandemic was going to affect our revenue. And so the forecasts were really based on my best guess, if you like, of optimistic, realistic, pessimistic scenarios for revenue. So we were modeling things like if revenue goes up by or down by this amount, or if churn goes up by, this amount, what does that do to cash flow in order to decide whether we needed to make any cuts. And I was using things like QuickBooks and Google Sheets at the time, just to, just an idea of how those things might pan out.
And then did you feel like you had a lot of confidence in the forecast and you were able to make some clear decisions, and how did those pan out for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to say you have utter confidence in it, because I had confidence in the underlying cost-based numbers because I'm pretty close to those. But, we just couldn't know how the revenue situation was going to go. So I think the first thing we really did was to take a look at our costs, because that's the thing that is controllable. And I think we took a pretty aggressive approach to that in terms of preserving capital. So, we did things like cut out all of our discretionary spending. We reviewed and cancelled all of our third-party contracts that weren't really core to the operation. So the nice to have things that we were working with before. We put a freeze on hiring. We had to let a couple of our probationary staff go. And then we went through all of our cost centers and we were looking at things like, entertaining, travel, accommodation. Of course, easy to cut those things out when everything's locked down and you can't go anywhere anyway. And so, and that in itself had a kind of knock-on impact in a positive way in terms of reducing our carbon footprint, which is one of our goals for 2022, to get to carbon neutral. But, of course, it meant squeezing. So I think we had confidence in those numbers. The bit that was the real variable that we didn't know was, would our customers renew their annual contracts? Would we be able to win more business? And so we kind of modeled that in terms of, sort of fairly high and fairly low projections, just to see what would be the trigger points at which we might need to make further cuts. So that gave us a pretty good track to run on. And then we just reviewed that on a month-to-month basis, to be honest. Luckily for us, the pandemic has brought us more business rather than less. I think the enterprises found that because they couldn't meet up in person with their clients, there was more need to do that digitally. So actually it brought in more business for us, and we haven't needed to cut any further. But certainly that was the sort of process that we took a couple of years back.
Well, it's great to hear that you haven't needed to cut any further from there.
Yeah.
It still must have been a tough situation to be in. What were you feeling? What was going through your head through all of that?
Obviously an immense sense of responsibility. It's not just about the numbers when you're talking about potential staffing cuts, the emotional impact on those that are affected, on the team that's left behind. You're looking at how are you going to continue to operate effectively? What's it going to do to customer service? So there's all of those different kind of considerations going on in your mind. I think it was important to get it right. We have a fantastic board at Zoomforth, and they certainly, for me, were a great sounding board and a sense check in terms of the decisions that I was making. I think as well that the biggest thing is at Zoomforth, we've always had this very open, honest culture. I didn't want there to be any kind of closed door discussions, if you know what I mean, that where the staff were wondering, what's going to happen, is our job at risk? So actually in every quarterly all hands meeting for the next year, the first item I put on the agenda every time was, is my job safe?
Yeah.
So that we could actually address the elephant in the room, as it were. We've always explained the financial position to our team at the quarterly meetings, and I didn't want that to change. So I think by being open about it, where we did need to make cuts, everybody kind of had the context. So we were able to speak freely about it and come up with solutions together pretty much.
That's great to hear. And do you feel like that maybe engendered additional loyalty to you in the company, or just gave people a better feeling about, trying to get through the crisis?
I mean, you'll have to ask the team, but I feel like we have really come together over the last couple of years. Yes, we had to find a way to just be there for each other as well, because, on top of dealing with the financial pressures that the pandemic brought, of course, a lot of the team were dealing with individual issues, bereavements or sickness within their family or even themselves. So I think, by just having that open dialogue throughout has definitely been a very helpful thing for us as a firm.
That's great to hear, and probably a rare trait too, where there is that two-way transparency.
Yeah, it's nice to be able to influence that at the CEO level. Do you think? I guess you're in the same position.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, and I guess just one more question on that topic. So it sounds like the process you used to kind of put the forecast together was maybe a manual process. I guess how easy was it for you to kind of update the assumptions as you were going through, and what were the pain points, or were there any other tools you wish that you'd had looking back?
I think that the two elements that I found hardest to model, I guess, were different headcount assumptions, because you have to kind of create a new scenario each time in QuickBooks for that, and it's a little bit fiddly to mess about with, when actually you just sometimes want to be able to say, if we had 3 of these and 2 of these, what does that do to things? So that, I think, was one area where I built my own, kind of in Google Sheets. And the other was around product pricing, because I think that came into sharp focus as well early on, of thinking, well, do we need to change the way in which we price? Our clients are being squeezed in terms of their budgets, because nobody really knows, how this is going to impact longer term. Do we need to find a different way to enable people to use the product? So I did quite a lot of financial modeling around the pricing of our product, and that side of things was hard, because you have that knock-on thing of, if I price this in a different way, what does that do to the renewal income? And what does that do, of course, to new business? So for me, those were the 2 areas where I built out my own sort of manual process for those things. But I think I'm in a slightly different position, perhaps, to a number of other CEOs, in that my background is financial services. I've grown up with spreadsheets and financial analysis, so it was perhaps a little bit less painful than certainly it was for colleagues that I've spoken to in the industry.
Sure. Yeah, and it's nice that you had that background too.
Yeah, that was definitely helpful.
Yeah. Great. Well, I guess moving on, would love to hear from you, kind of what is your greatest piece of advice that you have for other, small business owners or CEOs, just for, either from a financial standpoint or just in general for running a business?
I would say, from a financial standpoint, understand your cash flow. the SaaS world is very different to businesses that I've run or been a part of in the past. This kind of software as a service world is super focused on revenue. But I remember very early on in my career, which was a long time ago now, hearing, do you remember that phrase? It's something like turnover is vanity, profit is sanity. And cash is king, I think, is the end of that phrase.
Yeah.
And that kind of always stayed with me, that thing of knowing your cash flow, because otherwise it's very difficult to budget. It's very difficult to know when you need to pay bills, whether you're going to have to pay any tax at some point, the points at which you should raise funds or borrow, when you should invest. All of those things, I think it was always instilled in me quite early on. You need to know, when the cash is actually coming in, not just how much you're making. So for me, I think that's pretty fundamental. I would say that would be a good piece of advice.
Yeah, I'd say that's a great piece of advice, and it sounds like it served you guys well during the pandemic.
Yes, yeah, it certainly has done. We run on revenue. We're not funded at the moment, so we're making sure that every penny is accounted for sure.
Completely get that. Great. Well, I guess for the last question, because I know we're running short on time here, what would you say, just in general, you're most passionate about when it comes to running a business?
The thing that I have got really excited about in the last couple of years is, have you heard of a lady called Mary Portas?
No.
She's British, so it might not have come across the pond, but she has this kind of philosophy called the kindness economy. She does this really great TED talk to explain it if you get 5 minutes to watch it. But it makes so much sense to me. It's about creating what she calls a triple bottom line of people, planet, and profit, in that order. So for us, that translates in terms of having a culture where you really value people, not just your staff, but your customers, your suppliers, everyone that you're dealing with, and having a product that can, in some small way help the planet a little bit, which we hope to do, of course, but also having a sound business model, because at the end of the day, you do, of course, want to make money. But it's just that idea of putting people first before profit, which I think is what engenders that loyalty that you were talking about a little bit earlier. So I guess for me, that's something that I get, quite excited about when talking to colleagues.
Yeah, and I think that's a great philosophy to have, and an important one too, right? While we're in the middle of the great resignation, great reshuffling here.
Exactly.
People are tired of feeling like they're just cogs in a machine. They want to feel valued, that they're doing meaningful work, and that people care about them.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I think, it's a good philosophy to live by for sure.
Yeah, I'll have to check out that video.
Yeah, I do. I'll send you a link.
Oh, great. Well, Wendie, I really appreciate the time. I think this has been a great conversation, and wish you and Zoomforth all the best.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed.
What a wonderful conversation that was with Wendie. Here's a few key takeaways that I had from our conversation. Wendie mentioned that she's been using manual spreadsheets in order to conduct pricing, forecasting, and scenario analyses. This is certainly one way to get your hands around your financial picture and your business's prospects. The issue with it is that it's time consuming, it's error prone, and it's also not necessarily dynamic. If your assumptions change or you want to look at different scenarios, you've got to spend who knows how long, maybe a couple hours even, going through and updating formulas and tweaking assumptions in order to build out those additional views. Flight Financial can help with this by taking the work of forecasting off of your plate. We've got a semi-automated monthly approach that involves dynamic budgeting, forecasting, and scenario analyses. So say, for example, you wanted to look at the impact of a key decision, such as hiring a new person. We could help you do that so that you could be able to see the impact to your P&L, your balance sheet, and your cash flow statement in real time. If you wanted to, instead of just one person, maybe you wanted to hire a couple people and they're all getting paid different salaries, we could quickly fold in those additional assumptions. Then say you wanted to keep a few of those employees, but maybe you wanted to toggle off hiring one or two, or maybe you wanted to push the timing of hiring a couple out for a few months. We could also do that for you in a matter of minutes. So that's one thing that I wanted to call out. Another was that Wendie's was fortunate because she does have a financial background and experience. So it made performing detailed financial analyses on her business feasible for her. But you don't have to have a detailed financial background or be a financial expert in order to benefit from having strong financial reporting. Flight Financial can help you out here. We've got a monthly business review process that looks at your actual results, compares them to your expected results, and updates expectations accordingly. We'll also dive in and do more detailed financial analyses on historical trends, key performance indicators, and financial metrics so that we can provide you with actionable insights to help you take your business where you want it to go. Another thing that Wendie mentioned that I wanted to call out here, cash is king. You've got to know your cash flow in order to be able to effectively operate your business, in order to budget, to know when you've got to pay bills and taxes, to know, does it make sense for you to raise outside money or to take on debt? You know, a lot of questions. And Flight Financial can certainly help you out answering these questions by providing monthly reporting and dynamic cash flow forecasting. That way, you'll always know where your business stands and you'll be able to plan accordingly for future challenges. The last thing that Wendie mentioned that I wanted to note here, she spoke of Mary Portas and the kindness economy, and specifically the concept of the triple bottom line: people, planet, and profits, and in that order. And that is so true. There's so many things in life that are more important than money. And Flight Financial, we can certainly help make sure that your business is on sound financial footing and that you've got a clear view into things that you need to do to secure the financial future of your organization. But more importantly, we can free up your time so that you'll be able to focus on the things in life that truly matter to you, whatever those things may be. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Wendie. I know I certainly enjoyed speaking with her. I'm Brian Zaff, the founder and CEO of Flight Financial, and I'll see you next time.